Hello, once again. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much, and a very warm welcome to you all to this Global Tech Justice Conference for 2025. My name is Ashna Kalemera. I am wearing two hats today. Day to day, I am the Programs Manager at CIPESA, the Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. I am also the steering group leader of the Global Coalition for Tech Justice, the conveners of this conference. I'll give a few remarks to kick us off. We've got a great lineup of speakers and great conversations, and quite obviously, the report that has brought us here today. 3 months ago, in December 2024, it marked the end of the largest global election cycle in modern history. Over 70 countries went to the polls to elect politicians, including parliamentarians, presidents, regional and local government leaders. With over 5.24 billion people on social media platforms globally, accounting for nearly 64% of the world's population, 2024, which was dubbed the Year of Democracy, marked the height of social media's influence on democratic discourse. The huge concentration of the social media users that I just mentioned, 5.24 billion, are in the hands of four big companies. That's Meta, Google, X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok. These companies, which are owned and controlled by a very small number of extremely wealthy individuals, shape the online public square with little or no public obligations. Our movement, the Global Coalition for Tech Justice, brings together over 250 organizations, networks, experts across 55 countries, making it the world's largest movement devoted to holding tech platforms to account. I'll repeat those numbers: 250 organizations, networks, and experts across 55 countries. That is the Global Coalition of Tech Justice. A bit of background on the coalition. It was created in the run-up to the 2024 Year of Democracy, and the aim was to address what we call the global equity crisis and the resultant harms at the center of tech accountability. This crisis is one in which the big tech companies, mostly headquartered in the global north, and the regulators responsible for them have been negligent when it comes to dealing with the impacts of these companies everywhere, but most especially and most seriously in the global majority. The coalition set out a number of calls to action or demands to the tech companies in the run-up to the 2024 election cycle. Those demands included: 1, fully resourced election plans for countries going to the elections during 2024, investments in robust safeguards, and 3rd, linguistically and culturally competent content moderation. While there were some responses to these calls to actions in the form of general information and a handful of meetings, overall, and quite disappointingly so, responses from the companies were very poor. In some cases, and in fact, as we have witnessed since the beginning of 2025, the companies rolled back rather than increase their investments and safeguards. So we are here today to explore the consequences of this across the global majority world. We will explore the key trends of how big tech impacted elections integrity and human rights in 2024. That exploration will center across a diverse set of countries and contexts, large and small countries, from long-standing democracies to fragile and conflict-affected states. The report that's being launched today, titled Clicks, Code and Consequences, Big Tech's Gamble with Human Lives and Election Integrity in 2024, the Year of Democracy, highlights 10 key trends. I won't spoil it for you, obviously, but I'm just going to highlight them, I promise. The first is that there was very poor regional commitments and resourcing. Secondly, failures to stop the online spread of incitement to violence, harassment, particularly that targeting minorities. Facilitation of online gender-based violence, failures to address coordinated disinformation, which undermined electoral integrity, algorithms promoting the most harmful content, politically motivated censorship, abysmal application of rules and inadequate transparency on political advertising, selective non-compliance, non-cooperation with state laws and institutions. Second to last was platforms obstructing independent scrutiny. And last but not least, poor transparency and response amidst growing generative AI risks. Quite obviously, self-regulation of social media platforms and technologies has failed. We must chart a new course. Today, at this conference, we will hear from civil society leaders, experts, and policymakers from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, and the Middle East, who are going to debate what's happened during the 2024 Year of Democracy and strategize on a new course of action as we look ahead to the future. Now is the time for all of us to speak and for all of us to shape the future of a rights-respecting tech governance. Thank you once again for joining the Global Tech Justice Conference of 2025. It's our absolute honor and pleasure to host you all this morning and this evening or afternoon, depending on your time zone. I will now hand over to Alexandra, the Interim Executive Director of Digital Action, who are the convener and the secretariat for the Global Coalition for Tech Justice. Thank you so much and all the best in today's proceedings from sunny Kampala.
Thank you so much, Ashna, and welcome to everyone who's joined us today. Digital Action is honored to serve as the convener of the Global Coalition for Tech Justice. As a globally connected movement, we know that no single actor or country can challenge big tech power alone. The world's social media platforms have been given the green light by the new US Trump administration to slash and burn online safety, not just in the United States, but across the world. Because these tech giants want to continue making billions of dollars from hate clickbait, whether that's Trump in the US, President Modi in India, President Kais Saied of Tunisia, or any of the armies of trolls harassing people for profit and power, they are continuing to make profits out of this hate economy. And that's why our movement is needed for a future that's defined by justice, equity, and accountability, in which private companies operating globally cannot play fast and loose with our fundamental rights and freedoms, cannot make life hell for the most vulnerable and for the most vilified, whether that's religious or racialized communities or women of all colors. People died during the 2024 elections, and we want to pay tribute to them because they died because of the decisions made by Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and the founders and CEOs of Google and TikTok. Their refusal to do the complex and yes, costly job of making online spaces safe for everyone. We cannot let this happen again and again. And as we have seen over the past and in the past decade, today we're going to hear from civic leaders and policymakers from 15 different countries. In our movement, as Ashna said, we come from over 55 countries on all continents of the globe. Our strength comes from being together in community, in our shared values, and in the power of collective action, mobilizing ourselves as civil society and activists alongside policymakers, journalists, allies, united in creating another kind of future. And together we can learn lessons, the lessons we need from the 2024 election cycle, and chart a new future of democratic and equity-based governance. So we invite the audience to participate with your comments and questions in the chat box and to engage with all of our speakers today. We're so excited to hear from all of you. And now we'll proceed to our first panel. And I'll pass over to Belanda Nkowani of Digital Action in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex and Ashna, for those apt and timely remarks and really just kicking us off today for our first ever Global Tech Justice Conference, which we have dubbed Clicks, Code and Consequences, Big Tech Scramble with Human Lives, Democracy and the Pursuit of Justice. I'm London Kowani and I lead campaigns and partnerships for the Africa region here at Digital Action. And I will be moderating the next session, which is focused on big tech and the 2024 elections. What were the key trends and takeaways? I'm sure we're all quite curious to know what those are. In just a minute, I'll be crossing over to 4 speakers from the Africa, Asia, Latam, and MENA region who will be giving us a better snapshot of what transpired during the 2024 mega election cycle, and of course, what were the lessons. But before we do that, allow us to screen a short video, which is really a teaser and summary of some of the key takeaways from last year's elections, as well as big tech's gamble with democracy and human lives. Billy Joe, we can go ahead and play the video. Slight technical challenge, but I believe it will be up shortly.
Do you remember when we had high hopes for social media and its power to bring people together and topple dictators? Well, today, to protect their wealth and avoid accountability, big tech oligarchs behind Meta, X, Google, and TikTok are siding with disinformation superspreaders, including US President Donald Trump, emboldening far-right and authoritarian leaders around the world. In the case of Meta, owner of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Threads, which serves over 3 billion people with content daily, CEO Mark Zuckerberg is sacking fact-checkers.
We're going to get rid of fact-checkers
and weakening hate speech policy to allow more abuse towards women, immigrants, and LGBTQ plus people.
The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff.
These voluntary company standards meant to safeguard elections and human rights never really mattered to big tech CEOs. Last year, over 65 countries held elections in one of the biggest election mega cycles. We demanded that the companies invest more in fact-checking and safeguards. But they did the opposite. What followed was a deluge of disinformation and hate speech that undermined the integrity of the ballots and incited violence against women, LGBTQ plus people, Muslims, and migrants. In some countries, innocent people died as a result. All of this happened before big tech billionaires joined forces with Trump to avoid accountability and enrich themselves even more.
The future is gonna be amazing!
Can you imagine how much more harm they're going to cause to societies and democracy now? We refuse a future where big tech platforms wreak havoc across the world with no consequence. We're joining forces with those who believe in a just and democratic future to fight back against unaccountable big tech. So join our call to action for global tech justice.
Very much, Billy Joe, for helping screen that video. Of course, we'll be getting right into our next session, which is really, big tech and the 2024 elections. What were the key trends? What are the key takeaways? And what are the lessons that we can draw out? And to help us with that discussion, I would like to introduce Siwa Kimati, who is from Tunisia and works for iWatch. Siwa, are you ready for us? Could you briefly take us through some of the takeaways and lessons from the Tunisian election, but of course, if you could also touch on some of the other elections that happened in the region. Over to you. Thank you very much. Siwa, you ready? don't believe I see you on the call. If not, then would have to put you on hold for now. Kavisha, I believe you're on the call. I hope you are ready to share some of the lessons and takeaways that transpired in South Africa. Kavisha, are you on the call? Please confirm.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Kavisha Pillay, and I'm the Executive Director of the Campaign on Digital Ethics. Bulanda, I'm just confirming that you can see my screen. Fantastic, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about the South African elections and the types of disinformation we saw. And before I get into that, I think it's important to just provide a little bit of context about that would perhaps help us to understand why we faced the onslaught that we did in South Africa. Now, over a number of years, there's been declining trust in institutions such as government, the media, as well as what we call Chapter 9 bodies. And part of that, these are constitutionally mandated bodies, which includes our Electoral Commission. And various perception surveys have been done over the years that have shown a very steady decline in trust from the public. So in this context of elections and disinformation, information that was coming out from the IEC, from the media and the government surrounding the elections wouldn't necessarily be taken as truthful, because there's also surveys that have come out from the Edelman Trust and others who say that when surveyed, this a significant part of the South African population sees the government as a big peddler of disinformation, of false information. So that distrust is very key to understanding some of the issues that we're facing. Similarly, there's a changing information landscape. So Reuters reports and others have shown that most people are getting the information online via social media. And with that, we're seeing a rise in influencers playing a big role in shaping the information landscape, in shaping narratives online. So instead of going to experts, journalists, or those who would have the necessary information, you're going to a local TikTok influencer who doesn't necessarily understand politics that much, but is shaping. But is shaping the landscape in terms of how people are viewing democratic processes. So with that in mind, there's 5 things that you need to know about our election last year. Is that disinformation defined a lot of what happened, that social media companies, in particular X, played a very big role in amplifying false narratives. Other social media companies such as TikTok and Facebook and Google as well came on to that they signed an MOU with our Electoral Commission, and essentially there was a direct access to these organizations if you want to remove any false information or false content. But X was the only platform that didn't sign on. And one of our local political parties played a very big role in spreading big lies, which made a number of people believe that our elections were rigged. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more. And some of the research that was done by Code showed that voters were micro-targeted on Meta by shadow organizations. And I'll also delve deeper into that in my presentation. And then lastly, as we go into future elections, we definitely need robust interventions in order to safeguard democracy, because what happened in 2024 was quite a defining moment for us, and it's likely that we are going to see similar tactics play out in future elections. So these are just some of the examples of disinformation that we saw during the election period, and it ranged anywhere from accusing the president of allowing foreign interference from the UN in America to intervene in our election. Popular influencers were accusing our Electoral Commission.
Prudence, may I please ask that you mute the mic? And to everybody else, if you are not speaking, may I please ask that you mute your mic? Kavisha, please go ahead.
Thanks, Bulanda. So popular influencers were accusing the Electoral Commission of being captured. There were some fake stories that were put out in, random online newspapers who were pretending to be credible sites, saying that some of the commissioners from the Electoral Commission were accepting bribes. And whilst we didn't see a high level of AI playing a role, we did see 1 or 2 deepfake videos. One of them was supposedly a video of Donald Trump endorsing the MK party, which is the party of our former president, Jacob Zuma. There was, some allegations against another party who was trying to, with the claim that they were providing fake IDs to foreign nationals in order to increase and boost their vote. And what you're seeing here is that, what happened in South Africa is not at all unique. These are borrowed narratives that happen, that we've seen elsewhere. Especially during elections, there's always a sort of high scrutinization of foreign nationals, a blaming of them for something, or that particular political parties are trying to get foreign nationals to illegally vote so that they could win. But there's also accusations of corruption and bribery, especially or that the election will be rigged if you're sure that it's not going to go your way. So what we're seeing is borrowing of narratives from all over, and then that comes into a local context and potentially where you don't have high levels of digital literacy, where it's very easy to persuade people and influence people in a particular way, it then does create a lot of concern in relation to what people believe to be true. So on election day, it was quite scary, I have to say, to observe this. And the first graph where you're seeing all of the words there, the word cloud, is essentially doing an analysis of the tweets and the conversations through social listening on that day. And the biggest sort of, the biggest word there is rigging. So that narrative was coming out quite strong on election day, but also in the run up to election day, there were a lot of these allegations that the votes were rigged, that the special vote that was happening, there was all types of corruption and fraud going on. And come voting day, I think there were particular individuals who were trying to see this narrative that the South African election was rigged. And the next chart was done by a group of digital forensic experts in South Africa. They're called MAMA. And what you can see there is where the biggest voices were coming from on election day. And all of these influences, this one with the red dot, this is the daughter of the former president, and she's in the MK party. As well as the dots surrounding them, they were all associated with the MK party. And you can see how large those voices are and how loud those narratives could be in relation to, for example, the IEC and others who are trying to push back and trying to counter some of the allegations of rigging or voter fraud and so on. So, a key takeaway from this is that if you have a loud voice on social media, there was a time I remember where we would argue whether, narratives that happened online would translate to offline. And I think we have seen that transition. And so those narratives that were happening in the online space, all of a sudden you were seeing media houses and others starting to pick up and wanting to talk about, voter rigging when there was no or very little evidence that this was actually taking place. So going to the MK party and the power of big lies, they did the exact same. They followed the playbook of Donald Trump in 2020, as well as Bolsonaro in Brazil in 2022, where they tried to make voters believe that you cannot trust the IEC, that it's captured by, and they're beholden to the current ruling party and the president. And essentially by the end of it, they, declared that they had won the election, even though the votes did not say that at all. They didn't win the election. But what you're seeing here is that big lie, disinformation by this party wasn't just used, to cause trouble. It was used as a political strategy, a political survival strategy in a way. And if you go through the history of the individuals in this party and the type of accountability that they're starting to face from our local law enforcement, they are trying to create and they are trying to divide and polarize our society in particular ways, but they're also trying to create a narrative where you cannot trust the media, you cannot trust law enforcement, because they're all captured by elite interests and it's only them who are fighting for the poor. So it is quite deliberate disinformation that they're spreading. And, it was there was after the election, and whilst we were waiting for the results to be announced, it was quite a fragile time, I would say, because there's a very high sort of level of wanting to incite violence and harm if things don't go a particular way. And I think everybody was on guard, including local law enforcement and others, just to try and prevent violence that has been associated with some of the leaders in this party. And in terms of targeting our electoral commission, it was quite harsh. They went after very particular members, such as the CEO of the IEC, as well as one of their commissioners, and created completely false stories around them that they were involved in, corruption, voter fraud in the DRC and others, which then led a very targeted and coordinated attack on our electoral commission. The next one, which I think was really interesting from our perspective at Code, was just the way in which you can micro target people on social media. And again, this is not a new phenomenon. Trump in 2016 through Cambridge Analytica, this is what had happened and what they had done, and it's to target people based on their likes and interests and try to persuade them to vote and not vote in particular ways, but also to potentially heighten fear or to heighten particular biases. And whilst we saw some of the political parties using Facebook or ads on Meta and targeting in a way, what was interesting was a group of shadow organizations who at the outset weren't saying that they're associated with a particular political party, but in some instances were actually spending more money than some of the political parties and trying to target people, some with blatant disinformation around policies that have to do with equity. So, a big issue right now in South Africa is our Land Expropriation Act, and there's a lot of disinformation, being peddled from the states. But some of these shadow organizations were already starting to peddle this disinformation during the electoral season. But also there were other organizations who weren't peddling disinformation, but were essentially targeting groups of people with almost exactly the same messages as political parties. So if you didn't know that this, if you were seeing an advert and you didn't actually know that this was associated with the political party, you may then have been influenced in some type of way. So this was also a big wake-up call for us in South Africa, as we don't have any regulations around digital advertising, nor do we do have regulations around political advertising. But essentially what you're going to see, I think, going forward is more of these shadow organizations who are very opaque. They're not transparent. They're not upfront saying that we are, aligned with party A. But what they will do is use will push a lot of money online in order to target particular people with the messaging of party A. And I think this is a big threat, and it does undermine voter autonomy and electoral integrity. So I'm coming to the end because I have been talking a lot, but essentially what we are sort of seeing in South Africa, and I think many parts of the world, is that there is a growing threat of disinformation, that false narratives actively undermine trust in electoral processes, in democracy, that social media, these shadow campaign organizations and others are fueling mistrust and further polarization. And we're going into a local government election in in about 18 months from now, and you could see without decisive action and without some form of regulations, I think our electoral processes will remain vulnerable. And the lowest hanging fruit here is to do digital literacy, to make sure that most people are able to understand what is false information, how to report it, and to decipher. But we do need better transparency from social media companies, as well as more stringent regulations. And it's going to take an all of society approach. So from the users of social media, the policymakers, the tech companies themselves, everybody is going to has to try to get involved. Or not try, everybody has to get involved in order to find ways to protect our democracy, because we know that democracy depends on truth, and it is our collective responsibility to defend it. So if you want to read more about the report that we produce called Subverting Truth with Power, you can just scan the QR code, or you can go onto our website, www.code-sa.org, for more information. Thanks, Bulanda.
Thank you so much, Kavita, for really painting that picture of what transpired in South Africa. And I believe we will also share that report with all of the conference participants at a later stage. But really, we see that on the backdrop of declining trust in electoral bodies and electoral processes, with the shifting information landscape, that information did characterize the 2024 South African election. And we also see the rise of social media influencers with some key political figures actually playing a big role there. And of course, interesting that you say that the playbook is not different in South Africa and what is happening everywhere else. And with that said, we'll now cross over to Maria Paula Alamanda, who works for Alafia Lab, Brazil. Maria, are you able to give us some of the key takeaways that we saw in the Brazilian municipal elections, and more broadly, what we saw within the region? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Belanda. Thank you for Alafia and for me. It's really important to be part of and share our experiences in a valuable space for discussion and exchange such as this one. I am Maria Paula. I am Executive Director of Alafia Lab. Alafia is a research think tank that focuses on areas that intertwine internet, politics, and societies. We operate in 4 main areas: human rights violations on digital platforms, polarization and informational inequalities, combating disinformation and information integrity. Our key strength lies in combining academic research with practical experiences, allowing us to generate innovative knowledge, provide data support policy decisions, and contribute to a more just digital ecosystem. I believe this is a common goal among all of us here. Okay, you can go, please, Belanda. The other slide. Yes, thank you. Yesterday was a historic day for Brazil, I have to say you. The Federal Supreme Court has decided to indict the former president of the Republic, Jair Bolsonaro. The accusations against Jair Bolsonaro is an attempted coup d'etat. For the first time, Brazil is considering charges against a former president for undermining democracy, so it's very important, it's big. The complaints have been separated into 5 sections, and I would like to draw your attention to one of them, which is the production and dissemination of disinformation and attacks on the electoral system. The proper functioning of the electronic ballot boxes in Brazil is an example to the whole world, including the global north. We all know this. In the 2022 elections, precisely in an attempt to combat disinformation about the electoral system, the Superior Electoral Court set up the Electoral Transparency Observatory to combat disinformation by showing the public exactly how the electoral system works. And also, for the 2022 elections, the Superior Electoral Court signed a memorandum of understanding with big tech companies, but this was not enough to curb the spread of disinformation. It was more like an exercise in futility. And this context is extremely important for understanding the role of big tech in the last round of municipal elections in Brazil, which took place in 2024. Okay, you can go, please, ahead to the next slide. That said, it would be pointed out that there is a regulatory vacuum regarding social networks in Brazil, which explains some of the electoral court's resolutions for the 2024 elections. There were 12 rules divided into 3 main areas: the rules governing the use of artificial intelligence in electoral advertising, the creation of an EDGE repository and other advances in transparency, and the establishment of new responsibilities of digital platforms. For these municipal elections onwards, social networks have to exercise what is being referred to as solidarity responsibility, which is very controversial, and in other words, says that big tech companies will bear the same responsibility as users who publish content containing disinformation and will therefore suffer the same legal consequences. This concept manifests in a stringent 24-hour takedown rule for electoral content that spreads demonstrably false or heavily distorted claims about Brazil's voting system or its electoral process. Brazil's municipal elections this year marked also an important milestone in AI regulation. The country held elections governed by an electoral directive that prohibited the dissemination of deep fakes. Okay, can you go ahead, please? And now I would like to share some findings from studies produced by Alafelab regarding the 2024 elections. The first one, during the 2024 elections, we developed together with Data Privacy Brazil, the AI in Elections Observatory, to map the use of technology throughout the campaign. We conducted monitoring and active search on digital platforms, press outlets, and fact-checking agencies to collect and document identified cases. We found that the expectation of widespread AI use did not materialize, with only sporadic applications in most cases had limited impact. The key finds of this was the broad application of AI technology for producing campaign jingles or assisting in content creation for low-budget campaigns, the creation of deepfakes by the public, which had a relatively limited impact, but demonstrated their potential for spreading disinformation in future elections, and cases of deep nudes targeting female candidates in different municipalities. Okay, you can go ahead, please. And also in the context of elections, we conducted a study on the spread of disinformation in messaging apps during the election campaigns, focusing on the circulation of links in WhatsApp and Telegram groups. The main findings, 17% of the links shared in the analyzed far-right WhatsApp groups were classified as containing disinformation, and on Telegram it was about 7%. 40% of links about the Supreme Federal Court shared in far-right WhatsApp groups contained disinformation. This was the highest disinformation rate we found, followed by links about economy, which was 28%, and both international and national politics, about 23%. In many of the analyzed links, disinformation was concentrated in the headlines, while the body of the article contained factual information and news. This clearly demonstrates strategies used to grab information, to grab the attention, and to manipulate the readers. And also, we found that opinion pieces were often presented as factual news articles, without any clear labeling of the journalistic gender, which makes it difficult for readers to distinguish between opinion and reporting. And next slide, please, just to sum up. I would like to call your attention because disinformation is a structural and a societal problem. To effectively combat it, we must consider its multi-platform infrastructure. content circulates in a hybrid ecosystem demanding a systematic approach, not focused on isolated platforms. Messaging apps with their unique characteristics and heavy usage are crucial in this system. It's necessary to bear in mind that disinformation has different impacts on different groups. Marginalized groups are disproportionately targeted by disinformation campaigns, and the Global South is also distinctly affected. Therefore, solutions must consider diverse contexts and social issues. Thank you so much for this. Thank you, Belanda, and all of you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for taking us through that. Interesting to see that Brazil introduced new rules for the municipal elections. But also really the main takeaway here is that disinformation requires a systematic approach because of course we can't isolate it from the big six engagement models. I'll now pause briefly to see if we have any questions. Please feel free to raise your hand and then our previous speakers will address those. But if you can't, feel free to just paste them in the chat and then I'll read them out. Any quick questions or reflections so far? Looking at the takeaways that we have seen from South Africa and from Brazil so far. I see a comment here from Kavisha that says, really interesting, Maria. Indeed, there's a lot to learn from the Brazilian experience. Any quick questions and reflections before we proceed to our next two speakers? Okay, I don't see any hands so far. So in moving along with our program, Siwa, I believe you're online. Can you confirm that you are able to speak?
Yes.
Okay, over to you. Please give us an overview of what transpired in Tunisia and of course more broadly in the region. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Belanda, and thank you, Digital Action, for putting this together. So before giving insights on election, I would like to give an overview of the political atmosphere in Tunisia and give update about what was known to be the Arab Spring. Because unfortunately, we had in 2021, we had a grab of power by the then incumbent president, which basically he frozen the parliament, he dismantled elected institutions such as the High Judicial Council, and basically started a rule, one rule man, let's say, power. So now the election in October came after or within a hostile political environment where there is a consolidation of power, as I said, where, for example, the election committee, which was one of our democratic safeguards, its operation by appointing someone who is pledging allegiance to the president. He changed the jurisdiction of the administrative court over electoral disputes just 1 week before the vote. He also weaponized the judiciary to pursue or to file lawsuits against opposition figures and against civil society activists, journalists. There have been repressive law on cyber crimes, supposedly on cyber crimes, but it was in a way to attack freedom of expression, especially online. Like there was no stakes on the election results because all everything was paved, or the way was paved so that one person could be in a way named or pronounced as winner, which was the incumbent or is the incumbent president. So basically, we know the winner before even the election starts. We only had 3 candidates, one of which were in jail. All the opposition leaders and figures were jailed and still jailed. So basically, it was not what we did and what we worked on was not voters manipulation, was not electoral programs or electoral content. It was in another way, working on attacks against human rights defenders, journalists, and media during the electoral period. In Tunisia, Facebook is the most dominant platform, than Instagram, than TikTok, but really Facebook is the main platform that is used by Tunisian, and it's also used by the government as the main communication channel. And unfortunately, it was weaponized to silence dissent and to coordinate the humanization campaign against human rights defenders in the months leading to the election. So throughout the electoral period, we identified the patterns where the president makes inflammatory statements, for example, labeling civil society actors and media and opposition as foreign agents or as traitors or as serving an external agenda. And then his supporters would amplify this and pick up these messages and coordinate a campaign against civil society organizations, against journalists. This moved to real world consequences where we have seen organizations' offices being raided by police, where we have seen, let's say, judicial prosecutions against journalists and activists. And it also, when it's related to election, it also was just used to justify the denial of accreditation to observe election to many election monitors. For our case, for my organization, because we have been monitoring elections since 2011, and the president started to claim that we have a huge funds, and this was really coordinated through Facebook mainly, that we receive suspicious funds from Thailand, and that we are coordinating or preparing an action to influence election. And then it was like gradually being fueled in a way that when we applied for accreditation, our accreditation was denied with other organizations. So we work with Facebook as a trusted partner with Meta later since 2019, and all over the electoral period we have been flagging content that is inciting violence against human rights defenders, against media, against journalists. And the only answer that we get is that labeling human rights defenders as foreign agents or as traitors is only an opinion, or that human rights defenders or journalists or election monitor are not protected under the community standards because they don't belong to a protected characteristic, which should be gender, race, nationality. So in a way we were left behind by Meta because they can deny that they know that this coordinated action was happening, because we flagged and we reported many accounts and many pages who have been coordinating these actions throughout the electoral period. And in a way, we think that Facebook or Meta, basically the company, did not take proportional action to what was happening on the ground, and was not doing its duty to uphold the integrity of human rights and to the rule of law. And I think in a way it prioritized not only profit but also the state buy-in over putting measures to protect election monitors and human rights defenders in Tunisia. And we even shared a report from Amnesty International and from Human Rights Watch that are linking what is happening on the ground with what was happening online. And they were flagging that these actions are coordinated online through Meta platforms, but Meta had another approach, and I think in the future with what we have seen as support of the big tech company CEOs and the inaugural ceremony of Donald Trump, we think that this only would be much more worse in the future, because human rights and civic space and election and democracy are really in the bottom line of the priorities of the big tech companies. So this is in a way what we are even still facing in Tunisia in terms of online campaigns against democracy and civic space actors. I'm happy to take any questions afterwards.
Thank you so much, Siwa, for taking us through that overview. And really just sad to learn about some of big tech's failure when we see they're in action and their failure to protect some of the human rights defenders in Tunisia. Quickly, we'll be crossing over to Amber Singh, who is a fellow and contributing editor at Tech Policy Press. Amber, could you please just paint a picture for us of what happened during the Indian election and what lessons can we draw out? Over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Belanda. So in India's elections, I think one of the key things that emerged very clearly was that the political parties relied very heavily on the digital infrastructure that they had available to them. And when I use the word digital infrastructure, I use it broadly to cover the use of social networking sites, dedicated mobile phone apps that some of the political parties created, WhatsApp groups that are used extensively for sharing of information, including a lot of misinformation and hate speech in India, arrangements for data collection and access that political actors have created, where because of the lack of an implemented data protection law in India, there is widespread and real-time access to a lot of electoral data and other forms of socioeconomic data withheld with targeting. And then obviously, I think the use of AI-based synthetic content for things like personalized calling or otherwise, which were used by political actors. Now, India has roughly 820 million internet users, and that still only accounts for 60% of its population. Roughly 46% of its population is online. This means that the potential for use of this digital infrastructure will only grow dramatically in the coming years. And what we see as very extensive digital infrastructure being built by political parties, and amongst them the most advanced and most sophisticated infrastructure has been created by the ruling party, which is the BJP, led by Narendra Modi. But it is still only a fraction of what we may witness over the next decade. And most of this digital infrastructure operates in a relative regulatory vacuum. There are very scant regulations about campaign financing laws, which make it very hard to track the movement of money to fund an army of kind of diffuse actors online. And it also, I think, there are kind of limited regulations around speech, particularly around online, harmful online content, which makes it much harder to regulate. And I think some of these examples from India are also relevant because they have implications not just for future elections in India, but they also offer novel strategies for sophisticated, well-funded, and organized political actors in other mobile-first majority world countries, particularly those where there is a powerful executive and low regulatory capacity. I think one of the key things that we've also covered in the report that is being launched by the network today and by Digital Action is that there was an analysis done by Human Rights Watch of 173 campaign speeches made by Prime Minister Modi, many of which propagated, most of which were propagated online. And even after the code of conduct, which is the primary kind of regulatory kind of instrument to govern the behavior of politicians right before and during the elections, even after that code of conduct was in place, the speeches which were analyzed by Human Rights Watch, they suggest out of 173, 110 speeches made Islamophobic remarks, which was intended to undermine the political opposition. And even though the code specifically forbids appealing to communal feelings for securing votes, but that is exactly what was done by the country's prime minister. So I think it's important to kind of, when we look at India, it's important to look at the arrangement that exists for regulation of political advertising before online before the online medium was used for electioneering. There were kind of some processes which were in place to regulate political advertising, and they would often require, before you went to the print media or to the broadcast media, they would require a process of pre-certification by the election management body in India. And that was the primary way in which the election management body would ensure that the code of conduct, which prohibited harmful practices during electioneering, they were not kind of being propagated through different mediums. Later, there was a Supreme Court order which actually extended this requirement to online advertising as well, and then was recognized by the Election Commission of India. Despite the existence of this regulatory tool that the election management body has directly at its disposal, this is not followed for political ads that are posted either by candidates and political parties or by diffuse actors who are connected to them online. And this was, I think, one of the biggest kind of lacuna and failure of regulatory authority for online ads that we saw. The other kind of issue that I hinted at earlier was about public access to sensitive voter data that exists. Because of a very poor state of data protection and privacy practices in India, most of electoral data that exists is available online and has over time been digitized and datafied by political parties. Even though there is no organized system of registered party affiliations in India, like you see in countries like the US, and then the range of options that a voter has in a multi-party ecosystem like India is also much greater, as opposed to bi-party systems. It is possible to look at the demographic makeup of a constituency and correlate it against past voting records to arrive at broad conclusions. And there are ways in which we've seen that this kind of use of machine learning techniques and sort of regression analysis has compromised the protections that are offered by secret ballots as well. So that was also, I think, a case of the state of electoral vote data, as well as social media data, as well as other forms of digitized data that was available, and its use by political parties. The other kind of issue that obviously emerged significantly in the run-up to the election was the impact that AI, and particularly generative AI, would have on elections in India, much as it was kind of feared in a lot of other countries. I think in India, largely most of us who covered the election felt that it didn't lead to the kind of dystopian scenarios that one feared about the use of generative AI. There wasn't as much there was use of deepfake, but not as much rampant use. AI or generative AI was used more kind of both in India and also in Pakistan. They were used in kind of innovative ways by certain political actors to, in some cases, incarcerated politicians use generative AI to kind of have their holograms giving speeches and things like that. That was done very notably by Imran Khan in Pakistan. And then a version of that was done by Arvind Kejriwal in India. We also saw the use of generative AI to resurrect dead politicians who continued to retain a lot of sentimental value for voters, and they were used to kind of argue on behalf of their parties or their progenes. So that sort of use of generative AI was very common. We didn't see as much adversarial use, or at least adversarial use, which was extremely convincing in a lot of cases. More than deepfakes, we saw more cases which was kind of more traditional things like cheap fakes or kind of, photoshopping of content that had been around for a long time. However, the I think more kind of less controversial and more regular uses of machine learning and AI was perhaps more impactful and harmful during the election. I think particularly for political targeting and messaging, and I mentioned earlier the use of demographic and electoral data to target voters with content. I think the use of AI was quite significant in that, to analyze demographic, household, personal data drawn from a variety of sources, and then make inferences about political motivations of citizens. So this was done both in terms of kind of analysis that political actors do, but also kind of how to gain recommendation systems that social media platforms use to kind of ensure that extreme viewpoints were being shown to voters in the run-up to the elections. So those were some of the key sort of highlights that we see emerging from India. Contrary to expectations, the Modi government did not come back with a thumping majority. It actually, its share of seats reduced so much so that it had to rely on coalition partners to kind of make a government. And part of that narrative was seen that we see a lot of state capture of the fourth estate and traditional media houses in India, and some of the opposition parties actually used platforms like YouTube in innovative ways to try to get their message across. However, we see emerging kind of regulations that where the state might extend broadcasting regulations to YouTube channels, which has led to fears about censorship. The other thing that I think we saw play out very much in India, but that is a trend across the world, was these partnerships between big tech companies and election management bodies. And they very much emerged as the primary way in which big tech companies sought to discharge their responsibilities and to do that much and no more. And in some of the states, unlike India, which had less negotiating power, to not even do that much, which is something that a report covers in some detail. However, in a lot of places, much like India, what we saw is that the arrangements that election management bodies had with big tech companies were extremely inadequate, often non-binding, and not extending to some of the powers, like I mentioned, pre-certification powers that the Election Commission of India has. So to the extent that the big tech companies were parties to these arrangements, it actually acted as an incentive to not do anything beyond them. So there were inadequate requirements made of them by election management bodies, often facing severe capacity challenges. And then what that translated into was that in cases where the state had more negotiating power, it was only the big tech companies only discharged their kind of responsibilities to the extent of what EMBs required. And in states where there was limited negotiating power, smaller markets, smaller countries, we saw them not even doing that much. So yeah, those were some of the key kind of insights that we see emerging from the Indian elections, both in terms of their implications for India, but also for other countries in the majority world. And I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Amber, for taking us through that Indian snapshot. Really interesting to see how, perhaps in the Indian case, the impact of generative AI on the election was much more significant as compared to the other elections that happened last year. Of course, not in a dystopian way, but at least we even see it in almost an anecdotal way, in terms of almost resurrecting dead politicians. But also it's really interesting in some of the partnerships between big tech and the elections management bodies. I think that is a similar trend that we have seen in terms of almost passing responsibility to the elections bodies, and then also having inadequate and non-binding arrangements. Being mindful that we are almost coming to time, but I'll quickly go over to the chat section to see if we have any questions. But also, if you would like to speak up, please feel free to just raise your hand, and then we'll have you ask your questions. I see here we have a question that says, what are some of the most popular forms of AI used in India? Were the AI contents accessible in the local languages? I believe that's for you, Amber.
Yes. So we saw, I think, as far as generative AI and large language models are concerned, we did see a lot of use of AI, particularly in terms of kind of natural language processing models and sort of solutions of that kind. I'm sharing a link here in chat about a short piece that I had written covering one of them. So one of the big examples was this open source tool created by the government of India called Bhashini, where we saw live translations of PM Modi's speeches. So across most of the southern part of the country, the ruling party has less kind of sway and has been less successful. And with Prime Minister Modi as the most kind of popular campaigner, this was seen as one of the ways in which he could reach through kind of translation of his speeches done in live mode, he could reach a wider audience. These are all tools which are very much at a more nascent stage right now. But I think that that is something that we will see emerging a lot in India, and also later with the AI summit happening in India. I think there will be a lot of conversation, particularly on regional languages, both in India, but also languages from, from the African continent and from parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia. We will see, I think, more conversation about that. But yeah, I think most of the examples, sort of the more kind of unique examples that we saw in India, had to do with live translations of speeches and kind of messaging that political actors had. But yeah, I think apart from, I mean, we did see these were all not very adversarial cases of use of generative AI. We didn't see as much adversarial cases, and I do think that while we focus a lot on generative AI, we tend to lose kind of focus on what perhaps might be much more important in the big tech context, is the use of AI by recommendation engines which are designed to radicalize.
Thank you so much, Amber. I believe we have room for one last question or reflection, but more importantly, I would really like to hear from everybody else that's on the call. If you did monitor an election, would really be interested to hear if you have any takeaways from those elections, and really what were your experiences? We have a question that says, what were some of the political micro-targeting techniques observed during the election? I'm not sure, Yvonne, if that's directly to Amber or to the other speakers as well. But if the other speakers would also chip in, I think where we observed some political micro-targeting techniques. Okay, anyone can respond. So yeah, Visha, perhaps Amber, as well as Maria, did we observe any political micro-targeting techniques within Brazil, South Africa? And could we share briefly about some of those techniques?
We didn't had any kind of study trying to see about micro-targeting. We did not do it. In Brazil, what calls attention is a priority which is called zero rating. That's why we call attention about the special role of apps, messaging apps such as WhatsApp and Telegram, because different from India, for example, in Brazil, everybody uses WhatsApp. So people go to get informed on WhatsApp, and that's the place where this information goes, and it goes through different platforms. It starts on WhatsApp groups, and then it goes to YouTube, then it goes to Facebook or Instagram. And as people have here this practice, which is called zero rating, they don't have to pay, people don't have to pay to use WhatsApp. They can't go to a fact checking, for example, to check if the information is right or wrong. And they can't go to newspapers to see it online because they would have to pay for it. They just don't pay to use WhatsApp, for example. And that's a huge problem here in Brazil when we talk about the elections. That's what we try to show when I bring to share with you that study, Alafelab. I think it's an aspect that we have to pay attention for future elections here in Brazil.
So much, Maria, for that response. And in conclusion, really, I think the takeaways from this session really are that closed groups like WhatsApp have become channels for the spread of disinformation. We are also seeing that disinformation was quite prevalent pretty much in all the elections that we have looked at today. And the playbook really is quite similar across the globe. But we're also seeing a scanty regulation on elections as it relates to online platforms, where countries really have failed to transition some of the traditional election regulatory tools to apply to online platforms. We're seeing their AI coming into play, or generative AI coming into play in India, failures to protect human rights defenders in Tunisia, and of course in Brazil. Interesting enough, seeing that users and platforms were given the same liability for the spread of disinformation. And of course, we touched briefly on some of the inadequate arrangements between big tech and electoral bodies. And we saw quite a lot of that playing out within India and in South Africa. So we've come to time, but really it's just a big thank you to all of our speakers from Siwa, Kavisha, Maria, Amber. Thank you so much for sharing those election takeaways and really just helping, set the tone and the scene for the next session. So I'll now be handing over to my colleague, Vlad, who will take us through the next session, which is charting a path to democratic governance of digital platforms. Vlad, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bulanda, and we are moving to this our second session. I'm very glad that everyone is joining. Thank you very much for making the space and the time to be with us today. We're going to give a few minutes just to wait for our participants who will be part of this session. And if you can, just hold on a little bit. We are going to talk about in this second session the charting a path to a democratic governance of digital platforms. This is going to be a dialogue that we are going to have with some policymakers, with the people who are in the forefront of the government, who are thinking about and also presenting a way of creating these paths and approaches on platform governance. And it will be an enriching an enriching way of talking through this session. So we're just having a couple of minutes in which we are just waiting for them to connect. We have here our one of the speakers, Gayatri. Thank you very much, Gayatri, for joining this session, in which we are going to explore the different routes, perspectives towards democratic governance of digital platforms in an era where big tech companies are increasingly influencing discourse, public discourse, democratic processes, social cohesion, and even sometimes are engaged in the problems related to the crisis around the climate crisis, and especially when it also affects people's lives. There is a big and strong need for effective governance frameworks, and it has been even greater and more urgent as we are seeing that self-regulation models have become exhausted. I just want to share also, due to recent events in Brazil, as Maria Paula mentioned, where former President Bolsonaro will be tried for leading an attempt coup against President Lula da Silva. We regret to inform that the Congressman Orlando Silva which we, and sorry for that, we put like a picture of another Orlando Silva, which is like not, we're like not now presenting, but unfortunately he is not going to be able to join today's. This situation actually in Brazil, as also like Maria Paula highlighted, precisely it's underscoring the profound influence of digital platforms that can have on democratic processes and political stability, having played a significant role in polarization and the spread of disinformation that precedes these events. This week, actually, and I saw that there are like some other colleagues here and some other partners joining. I had the opportunity to participate in the Climate Information Integration Summit in Brazil, which it became like also like evident how the connection from the spread of disinformation through social media platforms, through the big tech, it's also impacting on the climate justice and the way in which people it's accessing information, posing a direct threat to global climate goals, eroding public trust and hindering evidence-based decisions. Democratic governance, therefore, emerged as a central theme during this summit, recognizing also the essential way of ensuring information integrity on climate information, especially when we are also like heading to COP30. This experience is also reinforcing the importance of today's panel and the urgency of addressing these challenges from multiple perspectives and also addressing it from the regional context. Today, we are going to have the great privilege of having, as I was mentioning, policymakers from various regions who are bringing unique perspectives, shaping in their country's experiences with digital platforms. I'm very pleased to have on board in this discussion the Undersecretary General of Government of Chile, Nicole Cardoch, who is also a social communicator and a journalist from the University of Chile, Senator Luis Donaldo Colosio Riojas, who is an elected senator from the state of Nuevo León, also the Secretary of the Board of Directors of the Mexican Senate, President of the Digital Rights Commission, and Secretary in the Education and Monitoring of Implementation of the USMCA, the trade agreement with Mexico, United States, and Canada. And also, I'm welcoming here Gayatri Kandadai, the Director of Technology and Human Rights and the Business at the Business and Human Rights Resource Center. So we are now just, we have here Senator Luis Donaldo Colosio. Thank you very much for making the time, and thank you very much for having this opportunity to listen about what it's in the forefront of the legislation work that you have been doing in Mexico. What are the approaches that you are thinking about platform governance, how it collides and how it also needs to balance in terms of human rights perspective, freedom of expression, and how platform governance it's being in as a way of moving forward on making big tech more accountable, more transparent. We have seen different efforts around the globe on how it is relevant and how it is important to move forward on this. The UNESCO has released these guiding principles on regulation of social media platforms. So this is going to be and way of how to advance in digital platform and having these different perspectives from the region, from Mexico to other parts of the world. So with that, I hold on. I have like okay. There is like yeah. A mention that well, we can start. So we are going to divide, and please everyone, we have like the big experience of the senator who is leading the commission and president of the commission of the digital rights in Mexico. I would like to make this more as a conversation with you and with Gayatri, and we'll see if also the undersecretary is joining a little bit later, but we can start definitely with this dialogue. I will also like welcome everyone to share also like their questions, comments, or so on during this panel. And I want also like to make a pause and to say a very big welcome to Dalia and Lucy, who were also appointed as the co-directors for Digital Action, who are also like joining this call. So for that, please, I would like to pass to the Senator Luis Donaldo Colosio, who has already joined, to give a few initial words around the work that they have been doing and their perspectives on the governance, democratic governance of digital platforms. Very welcome, Luis Donaldo Colosio, and thank you very much for joining.
Muchas gracias, Vladimir. Agradezco mucho a la Coalición para la Justicia Tecnológica la invitación para participar en esta importante conferencia. Me complace compartir este panel con tan distinguidas personas de todo el mundo que tienen en su respectivo ámbito en el Poder Ejecutivo chileno, en el Legislativo brasileño, la responsabilidad de construir política legislativa, es decir, política pública para nuestros países en la revolución de las tecnologías de la información y la comunicación, con una base de una perspectiva de derechos humanos. El vertiginoso desarrollo, sobre todo de las tecnologías emergentes, nos obliga a una importante reflexión de cómo protegemos los derechos digitales, es decir, los derechos humanos en un entorno virtual en nuestros países. La libertad de expresión, el derecho a la información, la protección de los espacios en el mundo virtual, no solo personales, sino colectivos y sociales, para preservar la totalidad de nuestros sistemas democráticos en su integridad, de manera muy relevante en los esquemas de la democracia representativa de carácter electoral, que ha sido tema de debate que se ha planteado también en esta conferencia. Nuestros sistemas democráticos se enfrentan el día de hoy muchos retos, no solo los que se han señalado debido a las influencias de las tecnologías en los procesos electorales, sino también por el avance político de esquemas muy radicales que van ganando posiciones en las elecciones, y destacadamente reconocemos lo que señala el reporte: proteger a las personas y las elecciones, no a las grandes plataformas tecnológicas, que la coalición presentará el día de hoy, en relación con la influencia de lo que llaman los oligarcas de las grandes tecnologías en el desarrollo de las votaciones, tanto en Estados Unidos como en otros países. La información que nos comparten. Sí.
Luis Donaldo, can we make a very short pause so our translator can make the translation into English? Thank you very much.
La información que se nos comparte de que hubo elecciones en al menos 65 países durante el 2024, incluyendo las que se realizaron en México para elegir a nuestro titular del Ejecutivo Federal, y a los legisladores del Congreso, federales y senadores, en donde la coalición gobernante que culminaba su periodo del 2018 obtuvo un triunfo contundente, pero sin obtener en el proceso la mayoría calificada en el Congreso, sino por medios ajenos a nuestro sistema democrático. Todo esto nos motiva a debatir cómo el proteger las libertades, cómo el proteger los derechos, tanto en la acción pública directa como en el entorno digital, podemos hacerlo mejor. En México, desde febrero del 2024, el entonces presidente de la República presentó varias reformas constitucionales, de las cuales al menos 5 de ellas se concretaron a partir del septiembre pasado, han significado un cambio de régimen político hacia esquemas autoritarios que creíamos ya desterrados en nuestro país. Destacamos por su profunda transformación al sistema de contrapesos democráticos la reforma judicial, que entre otros aspectos modificó su estructura autónoma para llevar a cabo la elección de ministras, de ministros, de magistradas, juezas, jueces, a un proceso electoral cuyas reglas de proceso son retrógradas, son confusas, significa la creación de una diputación judicial mayoritariamente electa por la coalición gobernante. Por eso,
sorry again, Senator, we are having some issues with the translation, so let me just like check to see how are we going to solve the translation. Sorry for that, Senator.
No problem.
And yeah, we have here okay, hold on. Sorry for that. We're just like yeah, because we have to activate the, sorry for the people who has been connecting and not like listening to the translation. I think we are going to need to move to but the speaker is not okay. So our colleague Diana is going to send a link. So if we can please move to the other session, so people who is like who can like to connect. So we can just like move all together. There are like these technicalities with the translation that needs to be activated for the for our translator. So I will please ask to you if we can just like all move to this new new room, and we can just have like the translation for the words of the senator and also the rest of our participants. So if you can just like give us a minute, and we can share the link with all of you. Okay. So it's already here. So
I can switch to English if that's better.
If you, well, it's okay if we can all move to the link that I sent, and then we can continue over in that link if that's okay. Or Senator, if you want to switch to English, that it's also okay.
That's fine. So human rights and the digital expression can only be conceived in our democracies with freedom of expression as a cornerstone that confronts the inappropriate use of digital platforms when they promote disinformation and the violation of the right to information. It is important to be vigilant to counteract polarization, harmful content, hate speech, violence on social networks. Therefore, advancing in a balanced regulation with the support of citizen observatories, which at the same time protects the people and freedoms, promotes development in technological innovations as an imperative. There must be democratic governance models with clear regulatory frameworks to hold the entire technology sector accountable based on national and international ethical principles that allow companies to have transparent content moderation policies under standards of proportionality, and due process. So I want to end this first intervention first by congratulating the Global Coalition for Technological Justice for the important report it is presenting, and that will surely be an input for the diagnosis that supports the equitable regulation of digital platforms to favor the rights of citizens of our countries, and I remain at your service to open the conversation. Thank you very much, and sorry for the trouble with the translation.
Thank you very much, Senator. We appreciate your perspectives and the things on how you are looking for addressing and how to move forward with the governance of platforms. I would like to now welcome to Gayatri. Please, Gayatri, if you can share with us all the perspectives that you have around platform and democratic platform governance.
Thank you. First, thank you for putting this together, and I really appreciate a space where we're able to have multi-stakeholder conversations, bringing in perspectives from people who are looking at things from completely different perspectives, perspectives that obviously intercede with each other. So thanks for putting this together, and thanks to everyone for taking the time to be part of this conversation. I'm the head of tech accountability at the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, where we track about 10,000 companies, obviously including tech companies. And we look at the range of human rights violations related allegations that are being made against these companies by civil society, media, or other credible reports. We reach out to these companies, asking them to respond to these allegations, and we track this. Technology has become obviously a critical part of our work over time. And before I get into the specifics of platforms, there are some broad-based trends that apply to the tech sector. And when we look at the tech sector in comparison to other sectors, which is a very critical perspective, we see some sector-wide problems, which obviously spills into the governance of platforms particularly. Now, what we've seen, and I would like to share a quick link here with you, we did an analysis of the data we have over the last 10 years of these tech companies. And we found some really troubling trends, which included the fact that the tech sector probably has a lower response rate than other sectors. And more problematically, this response rate has been coming down over the last 5 years. I'm not sure I'm allowed to send the link to the whole group. So I'm just going to send it to Mona. And then Mona, if you could share it, that would be great. Let me try and see. Okay, I think I can. Okay, so this report looked at that particular trend, is that the transparency of the sector seems to be lower than other sectors. But what is also very critical about the sector is that about 9 of the 10 top companies that we had repeatedly reached out to for responses were all headquartered in the global north, with the exception of one company. The impact of these companies are, of course, felt across the globe. But when we looked at all of our data, 77% of the allegations that we had recorded were linked to or involved tech companies in the global north. So we're seeing the repetition of patterns where the profits sit in the global north, to a great extent the labor sits in the global south, the impacts end up in the global south, and we are left in a situation where we are negotiating and trying to get responsiveness and responses from the global north. And we've also noted through different conversations we've had with partners that Global North colleagues have more access to both remedy and access to persons in these companies at a much better framework than our partners in the Global South. This could simply be a result of where these companies sit, but the impact of all of this means that the Global South is left with fewer remedies and fewer access to be able to advocate for these remedies. So that's about the broader sector. But what we've also noted is that many of these platforms are implicated in serious issues involving gender-based violations. A huge chunk of the allegations that we wrote about related to conflict areas, which predominantly are in the global south, labor rights violations that go on in most of the communications and social media platforms related companies. Now, we've been tracking this and we find that the responsiveness has actually gone down even more. Over the last quarter, we tracked the response rates of these companies, and it has actually become half of what we noted in the last 10 years. We noted this in the latest tech newsletter that we sent around, which focuses on tech accountability. Now, what does all of this mean? One thing is the harms relating to digital rights violations, but I think there's another critical perspective to bring into this conversation, which is the business and human rights perspectives, which is what is it that the UN Guiding Principles, which is now obviously accepted as an authoritative baseline for companies to follow, what does that expect of companies and where is it that these companies are falling short? At the very basic, companies are required to respect rights and required to not contribute to violations and be involved in these violations. And one of the short basic ways in which they could do that is by carrying out proper, effective, periodic and continuous human rights due diligence, which allows them to both record actual and potential human rights violations that their operations, products, relationships could cause, and try to prevent them in the first place, or at the very minimum, mitigate them. And to be able to make sure that you have in place grievance mechanisms that allows impacted parties and communities and civil society to be able to flag issues with you in a systematic, proper, legitimate manner, and not based on one-on-one relationships, not based on just sending information to an email that may or may not respond to you. So I think these are the fundamental requirements from tech companies. And I think the verdict is still out in terms of to what extent companies comply to these very basic requirements. This is much before we get to the question of remedy. And I think this is where, as the senator was just pointing out, I think this is where states could also really come into play, which talks about another very critical, in fact, the first very critical pillar of the UN Guiding Principles, which is the state's responsibility to ensure that our rights are protected and to ensure that tech companies, as any other company, does not violate these rights, and when they violate these rights, that there are consequences for this. And I think that oftentimes the global south is always looked at as the area where the problems happen, the impacts are felt. That might be true, but it's also where we could do a lot of example setting, and we've seen many instances where, for instance, Brazil was able to push back with tech companies. Mexico has been able to push back with tech companies. We've seen instances. Sorry.
No, continue.
Sorry,
continue.
am I going too fast?
No,
Okay,
go.
Sorry. So please let me know when I've run out of time. But just to say that states have a lot more that they can explore in terms of how to hold these companies to account. And I think one of the short ways of thinking about it is to look at what have been some of the remedies that states have pursued with other kinds of companies. What kind of remedies have states pursued with tobacco, with oil, with mining? Sorry. And I think that could be one of the ways we could get started. But ultimately, what I'm trying to get to is that there needs to be respect for rights from companies, but also states must be ready to regulate in a way that ensures predictability of consequences and what it is that you would face consequences for. But the last thing I wanted to say is how do we move forward, right? And I'll do this very quickly. One of the things that we try to do, and I'll share the link just here, is all of our colleagues have been excellent in articulating, sorry, one second. In articulating the problematic trend of backsliding on gender, on backsliding on DEI, on many of these other policies, positioning the industry as an industry as it needs more masculinity. All of that obviously has very evident consequences to communities that are being targeted. And I think our partners are doing an excellent job of showing what the consequences are and how that violates human rights commitments. But in this analysis we did, we also tried to look at how this practice is bad for business, is bad for the bottom line. Because if we look at some of the key trends that have happened, right, whether it is the deep fall in value of X or the fall in value of Tesla for anti-rights positions, these have consequences for the market, and these have consequences for people who have capital in them. It has consequences for employees working in these companies in terms of whether they're going to be able to get a salary or not if this trend continues. So I think that poor human rights practices are also bad practices for the bottom line for both investors and the companies themselves. It would be great if we start analyzing these issues by expanding more of these perspectives so that we're able to all bring in a piece of the puzzle. The last recommendation I would have, and I think the Global Coalition already has that going, and I think that would be for civil society to find ways to coordinate more and be able to come up with ways in which we are effectively able to dialogue and push back or challenge in whatever way it is that we need to with companies, with regulators, for us to be able to bring a full range of perspectives. That's as far as civil society goes. But for companies themselves, I think the most important thing is to be able to look at what their current practices are and really look at whether this sort of push for short-term gains, what does that mean in the long term for them as a company, as a corporate entity, and the same for investors. But really my recommendation for states would be to start exploring the full range of options that are before them to both support civil society at this time, but also address tech companies. Because as we heard from the previous session, practices of tech companies not only have impacts for people, it also has serious impacts for democratic systems, which has longer term consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, Gayatri. And definitely you are pointing to something that I would like to switch back again to our senator while we are waiting for Diego, who will join Diego Diaz-Gonzalez as the representative also from the Undersecretary Nicole Cardoch. Gayatri is putting something in the table and the things that states can start digging and doing about regulating, about addressing potential or actual harms that big tech are facing, or that are having it at the social level. So in terms of the things that could be done from a legislative perspective, and as a senator, what would you think are the first steps or the direction that needs to be taken from the experience and from the context that you are having now in Mexico, and taking into consideration these elements on the states has already different things that they have acted and regulation in regulating tobacco, alcohol, and other things. So why are we not doing this in terms of democratic governance? So, Senator, if you can join some of your reflections around what are the next steps?
Well, Vladimir, I think the example that Mexico is setting is not the best example right now, because for many decades we have had a relevant regulation on transparency and protection of personal data. But since the recent constitutional reform that disappeared autonomous body-empowered autonomous organisms were empowered to comply, this has been seriously damaged, because now the government will be the judge and the jury of the determination of the rights of information to public information. Likewise, in the area of telecommunications, the Constitution established rules and an autonomous institute that regulated this sector. But a recent constitutional reform has changed the rules of the game, leaving all the control, again, in the hands of the federal government, since the autonomous institute has disappeared. And to date, the new regulation of the system has not been established. So in the area of economic competition, the constitutionally autonomous commission that existed has been eliminated, transforming all control to the Ministry of Economy, with the new laws regulating that competence not having been established to date. On the other hand, with regard to the progress of regulation in the field of information and communication technologies, we are making progress. In the area of digital government, the constitutional reform on administrative simplification and digitalization was approved, as well as the creation of the Digital Transformation and Telecommunications Agency. This reform is all about simplifying procedures and serving with the express objective of eliminating regulatory burden on citizens and also avoiding acts of corruption, so transparency through technology. This will result in national legislation and simplification and digitalization like none that we have seen before. That I'm actually looking forward to. Because from my own experience as a mayor of the third most important city in the country, Monterrey, we worked on these digital government processes very successfully, and we are promoting a proposal in this regard for the whole federation. It is worth mentioning that the President Sheinbaum has also presented the general law of the public security system and the law of the national system of investigation and intelligence in public security matters that include the creation of a mandatory registry of mobile phone users. This one we are a little bit worried about, as well as a concentration of all databases in a mega database that has generated great concern among academics, specialists, and civil society organizations, especially because of the possibility that any security agency, including the armed forces, has access to this without a judicial warrant. That is very, very preoccupying. The lack of public policies focused in digital governance and the absence of a regulatory framework that supervises the development and application of automated systems represent a considerable risk that we are aware of in order to protect the exercise of human rights in the digital environment. When it comes to cybersecurity legislation lags significantly behind the accelerated growth of emerging technologies in the digital environment. So there is a steady increase in cybercrime and digital threats, while the current regulatory framework lacks comprehensive and up-to-date legislation that effectively regulates data protection, critical infrastructure, and cyber incident response. The disappearance of the Autonomous Institute of Transparency and Protection of Personal Data that we have referred to earlier is worrying in this context. So the new laws on transparency, access to information, and protection of personal data must respond to reality of accelerated advance of technologies and the reality of the country, which is ever expanding. The president has proposed the creation of a cybersecurity and artificial intelligence center. However, it should be noted that we still do not have any regulation on the matter that contains the ethical and responsible use of artificial intelligence or the digital rights of users for technological platforms. So from my office, we are working on a digital rights law right now in order to have the necessary framework that these technologies need in order to protect the personal data and the digital rights of our users, meaning our citizens. But we also have a sufficient framework that incites innovation and, in order to avoid these legal loopholes that today affect the protection of fundamental freedoms, such as the right to privacy, freedom of expression, and equal access to technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And definitely it poses also like another big question when we're like thinking about platform governance or democratic platform governance, when we are like seeing such backlash and how in certain democratic countries we're also like experiencing and seeing an erosion of the democratic institution, as you were like mentioning about what was happening on autonomous regulators and autonomous bodies that were like working towards having a greater transparency of public scrutiny, when we are also like seeing the disappearance of the telecommunication regulators and also on the side of the and competition bodies, which sometimes it's presented as, for example, the UNESCO guidelines also highlight the role of these institutions in terms of like giving independence from the governments, but also giving a special mechanism to address and to think about transparency, to know more about like what are like the potentials of content moderation practices. And as we were like saying in the previous session, like what are like the working on a digital rights law. And it's how can activists and civil society push for this stronger human rights safeguards in countries where like companies are not like being held and accountable? How are you building this this legislation? How are you incorporating some of the ideas and the work from civil society and activists in this?
Well, an active communication has to happen in order to bring into the table all of these points of view that are needed in order to have the best legal infrastructure available. I mean, you cannot have a one-sided piece of legislation, otherwise it's going to be an unfair piece of legislation. Therefore, what you need to do is have a round table with all the stakeholders that you can get in order to avidly present all the points of view that need to be incorporated into this legal framework, legal infrastructure. That being said, we need to bear in mind that albeit all those economic interests that may be aligned with your pieces of legislation, or maybe aligned with the interests of your legislation, sorry, you do need to take into consideration that the end user protection and his or her rights is the key core of this law that we are trying to do and make, take into effect. Otherwise, it's going to fail its purpose. What we need to do is always bear in mind that the legal infrastructure has to protect digital rights, the human rights in the digital space of our citizens. So we'll always have these great big corporations lobbying for their interests, but we have all these collectives and all these NGOs and all these civil society groups that are formed and that are very informed actually, and that also can be very nutritious for our exercise in the legal infrastructure creation.
And when you are like opening the space and the floor and thinking about like the great pressure that companies are like having and lobbying, and I think we saw this in the case of Brazil, where they were like trying to push for regulation of the famous bill 2630, the fake news bill. And there was something that even if you have like legislators, you have like civil society, like trying to build something to make more accountable and transparent social media platforms or the big tech, then you're like looking also like the big efforts and the big actions and the great like lobbying that these companies are doing. Are there like some lessons perhaps like from your experience and as a legislator that can be shared with the colleagues that we having here from like different parts of the world on how like can we like really advance on something meaningful when we are like trying to reimagine the possibilities of a democratic platform governance?
Well, first, you have to understand that not all big companies are the devil. Many big tech companies actually want comprehensive regulation to take place in our countries in order for them to function or operate properly or better. And you will find great allies in many of these companies also in order to create an adequate legal infrastructure, but never fail to take into consideration all those human rights groups that have already, done a great plight and have fought for these individual freedoms to be expressed in all of our legislative reforms. So I think the best and most important thing is what we're trying to do by legislating these digital backgrounds is going to require somewhat of a paradigm shift for many people that don't fully understand that the digital space can and also must be regulated in order to accommodate all of our freedoms. And that I think it's the single most challenging ordeal that we have right now, to change the mindsets of many of these people, many of these companies, and many of these legislators around the world, in order for them to, pay more attention to what we need to do in order to safely regulate the digital cyberspace.
And Senator, we are definitely, and it's really important, I think, from the Global Coalition from Tech Justice, and also with the report, we are like putting this at the center. There is a way, and as I mentioned also previously, an erosion of the self-regulation, and it's becoming somehow into an end. And then, as Gayatri was also like positioning and mentioning, states have like an incredible role to play on this, and move forward and change and create like this collective imaginary of how we can like start moving on this like paradigm shift, as you are like mentioning. Moving from that, from the things that the legislative bodies can do, and like this way of putting in place and changing it to a stronger regulation, what are like the experiences also as a senator, and perhaps also as a candidate that you were last year, when we are like thinking about electoral integrity? How you perceive that digital platforms are like could like impacting electoral processes? I think I know that Mexico, it's also having some elections. I would say sometimes a little bit controversial about the judiciary power.
Understatement of the century, mate.
But yeah, just like to know what are like the perspectives you, well, first as a candidate, as a former candidate, and also on as now as a senator and facing this context in Mexico, what are like the measures that could be like implemented or proposed in terms like to safeguard democratic participation in light of the big influence, as we're like saying in the first session, they could have like on elections? And I will also like open the floor if everyone would like to take some time also like to have some questions or comments. Please feel free to reach out, and up to you. We'll go to you back, Senator.
Well, nobody really likes to vote. It's a taxing ordeal. You have to go and make a queue and stand in that queue for sometimes hours on end. Many of these times it's a very hot day, and people just, it's a taxing ordeal. And the process of counting these votes and having all these safeguards in order to avoid electoral fraud or it's a very taxing ordeal for everybody. Implementing technology in these voting platforms can make a paramount change in the way that we procure democratic processes in Latin America, and I think the world over. Because we already have many technologies that are, so to speak, fraud-proof. For example, if you implement blockchain technology into our voting system, you may create a foolproof way of people, exercising their right to vote. So I think as technology advances and we are able to create better platforms that help people gain accessibility to otherwise taxing ordeals, such as standing in a queue for hours in order to physically cast your vote in a paper ballot. I mean, in order to safeguard all of our electoral process, we need to implement some safeguards that technology can only provide. So it's a great ally, technology. It's a great ally in order to implement many anti-corruption schemes that otherwise would be very, very hard to implement in the physical world. The digital safeguards are very, very important.
Thank you, Senator. We have a couple of questions. First, from Alex. She's asking, what is the potential for a progressive policymakers alliance across countries of the Global South?
It is possible. I mean, but I think the only thing we need to do is just reach out to each other and generate this international rapport between legislators from different countries, and we can certainly, just share our experiences and share the legislation that we have each have in our country, because I think the best way to move forward with this is pretty much sharing our experiences and generate the best pieces of legislation that we can through trial and error, because we are legislating a new frontier. So we need all the help we can get, and we all can gain a very wide perspective from all these shared and collective experiences that we can acquire by reaching out to our friends from the other side of the world.
Perfect. So yeah, we all here in this session, we have some homework to do, and perhaps try to build and create these connections between legislators across countries of the Global South. We have another question also from Azrak. Hopefully I'm pronouncing well, Azrak. Sorry if I'm not doing it correctly. How can digital rights activists push for stronger protections and legislations against platform-enabled repression in the Global South?
Well, you need to contact your local and federal legislatures. I mean, in the end, it is the legislative branch that has the power to regulate these entities in our respective countries. So you need to reach out. You need to reach out to your legislators and inform them, because many of us in the legislative exercise, we are new to these subjects, because these subjects are new to us as humanity. So you need to inform them, you need to educate them, and you need to push and pressure them into creating these laws with a human rights perspective, not with a corporate perspective. Otherwise, it's going to be a disservice towards the citizenry, towards your citizens.
Senator, that has been really great to having you in this session. We definitely take all these recommendations and definitely things in which we can move forward. First, connecting with other progressive policymakers, also as a digital rights activist and human rights defenders, researchers, and so on. How can we also engage with the legislators? And I think you point also a really good things when we're thinking about platform governance and democratic platform governance. There is also a strong need to place human rights as at the center, not the corporate or corporations at the forefront, and also the need on engaging and educating and creating also the awareness and building these alliances and building also frameworks for legislators to know more about the digital realm, to know more about the digital rights, to know more about how can we effectively address the power of the big tech, and how can we start thinking about accountability, transparency, and these mechanisms to reduce the effects that they are having in the public discourse, in democratic processes, and even in climate change, as also it's a relevant discussion that we're like having this year and in the following years. Senator Luis Donaldo Colosio Riojas from the Mexican Senate, the Global Coalition for Tech Justice, Digital Action. We are like very, very, very happy to have you here and share all your valuable insights. And we also would like to continue have these conversations with you, and definitely expanding it to other regions and to other colleagues. So thank you, and have a great
Thank you,
day
Vladimir.
in Mexico.
You too. Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you, everybody, for meeting with me today. Have a great day.
Thank you, Senator. And well, we are moving to our last session, our fireside chat, and I will give the floor now to Mona to continue also this conversation with the rest of the colleagues. And please, Mona, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vlad, and thanks everyone. So welcome everyone, and thank you for staying with us for the third session and joining this critical discussion on the role of tech companies in fueling conflicts and perpetrating harms. While previous sessions may have focused on the past year's election mega cycle and platform governance, this session will take a different approach. Our speakers, joining us directly from the ground, will share their first-hand experience in witnessing and documenting the role that tech companies have played during times of conflict and genocide. There was a time when many viewed the democratic revolutions in the MENA region as an inspiring model for using technology to drive change and to challenge authoritarian regimes. However, it has become increasingly clear, not just in the MENA region, but globally, that tech companies are aligning themselves with political powers in ways that enable oppression, normalize hate speech and violence, and further dehumanize vulnerable groups. For the MENA region, these are extraordinary difficult times. From Sudan and Palestine to Syria, Lebanon, Tunisia, and Yemen, people are not only confronting the oppression of authoritarian governments, but also suffering the devastating consequences of unchecked power on the tech platforms. Today, we will examine these urgent issues and discuss the critical need for accountability. I'd like to mention that some speakers were unable to join us today during the ongoing and intensified genocide against our people in Gaza Strip, which has continued since October 2023. Therefore, and before introducing our esteemed speaker in this fireside chat, I want us to take a moment to remember the people of Gaza and Sudan in those difficult times, especially our fellow human rights defenders, journalists, women, and the children who have been forced to bear the weight of injustice far too soon. Back to the tech giants. At this point, it is crystal clear that tech platforms are not just spaces for people to share their narratives and document human rights abuses. They are powerful actors that shape narratives, influence political realities, and in many cases significantly contribute to escalating violence, especially during times of conflict. From content moderation failures to algorithmic bias, from the spread of disinformation to data exploitation, the actions or inactions of tech companies have had devastating consequences in conflict zones. In this session, we will explore how tech companies contribute to exacerbate crises with a focus on Palestine and Sudan. We will examine how disinformation, hate speech, and algorithmic amplification of harmful content intensify violence, and how recent policy changes, such as Meta's weakening of its hate speech protection, pose even greater risk for already vulnerable communities in the conflict times. Finally, we will discuss the challenges civil society faces in holding big tech accountable, especially in regions where regulatory protections are weak or non-existent, and explore strategies for push for meaningful change. Now, and without further ado, please allow me to welcome my colleague and esteemed speakers. I'll start with Nadine Nashef, who's Hamle's co-founder and executive director, who's joining us from Haifa today, and Raghdan Orsad, who is Beam Report's co-founder and executive director, who's working on Sudan. I'll start with the first question, and maybe I can start with you, Raghdan, at the beginning. How do technology companies contribute to fueling conflicts and/or genocides for Nadeem? Its content moderation policies, harmful content, algorithmic amplification and bias, or even data exploitation. Can you share specific examples from recent or ongoing crises from Sudan and then from Palestine? Please, the floor is yours, Raghdan.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Mona, first of all, for planning the session and inviting us to it. Nadeem, we have not been on a panel together before, but I'm very excited to be here with you. Of course, I know Hamla and I appreciate Hamla's work. I think also the choice of Palestine and Sudan is pretty interesting for this discussion. But in general, this whole 3 hours session, I have listened while fasting. So thank you for keeping it engaging. That's rare. I don't know how I've done that. But yeah, with the focus on Sudan, so it's a very interesting question. Of course, the attention of big tech or these platforms to our region has been lacking to begin with, but you see it a lot more often, or like a lot more severe when there is a conflict in place, right? I often compare how they're working and responding to the crisis in Palestine and the way they're doing it in Sudan. I of course, I'm not going to talk much about Palestine while Nadeem is here, but for me, they are doing like targeted actions against a lot of people who are speaking on the Palestinian issue, whether they're in Palestine or elsewhere. But for us in Sudan, it's just a silence. It's lacking there. It's not even a priority. And of course, there's a lot of political reasons for that too. So let me focus on the lack of response, right? The ups and downs of Sudan is not new. We have been there since 2013. It got a lot worse during the revolution in 2018, 2019, where we also, as at the time, Beam Report did not even exist, but we as activists struggled with getting their attention on, activists trying to document and all of that, and the response has been lacking. It got worse because Sudan got worse. There was the coup, and then the war since 2023, which is 2 years in April. And with the focus on the war, Beam Reports started three years ago, so right before the coup and before the war. And since then, we have focused on monitoring what's happening online and responding to it. Beam Reports was created to explain as much as we can to the Sudanese citizens, because already the information ecosystem was really, really poor, and there are a lot of people who don't trust media anymore for many reasons. I have heard a lot of this discussion already with the Brazil examples, with other sessions, so I'm not going to repeat it, but it was already a weakened and fragile information ecosystem. So we created the company to try to bring a community together and provide information that people can trust, and also help simplify things as we go to continue that they have their citizen participation that was, flaming at the time. As we go, we have noticed, of course, we target misinformation, and with misinformation, there's often hate speech, and these two go together, right? So we kept trying to clear the air, I would say, in these social media platforms as we go by reporting when we see misinfo going around, saying like this is true or not, or helping people navigate why this is not accurate. But at the same time, we have noticed from the get-go that there was very much a targeted, coordinated misinformation campaigns. I would say it started way before the war. We have published a report during the coup, which was in 2021, where internet shutdown was happening in the country. And then the misinformation campaigns were not even done by the military, which we would expect it from them, or the government. It was done by the five prominent media channels, Arabic channels, that were covering Sudan, while Sudan had no news. So that was a very interesting report that we have published. I would encourage people to look at it. But basically, what we have realized that there is local coordinated misinformation campaigns, and there is foreign coordinated misinformation campaigns. And of course, being the only fact checker in Sudan, it was impossible for us to be the only one responding. So we started reaching out to big tech, the Meta, the X, all of them, and trying to like, okay, hey, we can help by flagging things to you, and then you can help us by responding to it. Let's improve your algorithms. Let's improve your community standards. Let's improve your keywords, the ones you're looking at. And frankly, we have done such a heavy lift. We have done their work, I would say. Like, we had an Excel sheet, which we usually wouldn't give anyone access to, with different tabs, with like an Excel sheet with keywords that we're finding for hate speech, and Excel sheets with misinformation that we're noticing, and then telling them where to find the accurate information. They had access to that. They were on it, like we could see them. They were looking at it. Absolutely no response. Absolutely no response, which for me, I don't even understand, because if we talk about resources, which I don't know how big tech doesn't have the resources, I'm guessing they just don't have the resources to dedicate to Sudan. Even when we do their job, all they needed is to just check across their policies and take action, and which they have not been doing. So for us, just to summarize, because I do want to leave the floor for Nadeem as well, these platforms have been used to incite violence, spread ethnic hate, and suppress civil society, whether it's in a coordinated way or just because of the conflict that is going around. And their lack of accountability in regions like ours means that the damage is ongoing and often invisible to the rest of the world. Not a lot of people hear about what's going on in Sudan. Like, when I tell people it's 2 years, people can't believe it. I am very sad about what's happening in Palestine, but the Palestinian civil society and probably the US intervention gave it a lot of light. So people have been paying attention to it, while there are other crises, and of course their action and or lack of it, I guess, have been brought some of our attention to Palestine. But when it comes to Sudan, it's just not happening. It's not a forgotten crisis. In my opinion, it's an ignored crisis. So I'll leave the floor to Nadeem, and of course, happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ragdan, and thank you, Mona, and Digital Action and the Coalition for organizing this important event. Happy to be with you here and share the thoughts and the idea and the experience of Hamle. But maybe before that, I think it's important to send our warm solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Gaza, specifically Bisan Audi and the others who were supposed to be in this event and could not be there. I think it's really important also to reflect on their situation in Gaza that's happening right now. There are more than 855 people who have been killed since Israel broke the ceasefire and a couple of weeks ago. In total, since this war started, we are speaking about more than 50,000 people who have been killed. Many of them children. Some people saying this is like the war where the most children have been killed. And their situation of even like starvation and using using the food, using the humanitarian assistance as a tool of war, continue to happen. But despite all the atrocities, despite the genocide, the war that's happening, unfortunately, social media companies, tech companies have been part of this war. They are actively assisting the Israeli war efforts that have been happening since 1 year and more than 6 months by now. And we are talking about assistance that's happening in different levels. One level is the whole issue of content moderation and trying to stifle the Palestinian narrative, trying to not allow the documentation of the atrocities coming out from Gaza, which came out despite of all of the efforts. So what we have been seeing in TikTok and in other platforms came out despite lots of effort to prevent it. So you can imagine what would be much more covered on that war if this was allowed. We need to understand that the bias in the content moderation, this is a historic thing that's more than a decade by specifically Meta and Facebook before that. These phenomena and the struggle that the Palestinian Civic Society, Hamle, and others, we have been struggling for more than decades. I remember like in 2014, starting, documenting the cases and speaking about the bias. The bias of Meta is also not only related to the Palestinian. There is also a layer beyond this, a layer even before that is the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim approach that have been happening for a while. The Arabic language is one of the most moderated languages ever on those platforms. The classifiers that they are operating are heavily doing content moderation to Arabic language in an aggressive way, adding the Palestinian layer on that, which is also looked at suspiciously and in a very aggressive way. We all, many of us read the leaks that happened during the war, how they reduced the threshold of confidence of violating content to 25% only, and other actions that the company took against the Palestinian content specifically. While on the other hand, they are allowing in a very free way the Hebrew hate speech and inciting the conversation to happen in their platform. There was no Hebrew classifier until the last year, or at least by the company declaration. But still, until now, by our research in Hamle, we are dedicating millions of conversation of hate speech and genocidal rhetoric that's happening on Meta and the other platforms that is not being dealt with. I want also to speak about AI bias and Palestinian racism that happened. We saw that in many examples on Instagram, and how the AI that is there was translating praise to God and Palestinian to Palestinian terrorist, how when generative stickers of a Palestinian child produced a child with a gun, and lots of stereotyping and stigmatization of Palestinians that's happening in those platforms. Also on the biased AI, which basically means that how much these things are in a very structured way, the racism and the bias that's happening also in the level of machine learning and in the level of AI and not being dealt with. Adding to that, I'm speaking about Meta as one example, but obviously this is happening also on the other platforms in different shapes and ways. But I also want to speak about weaponizing AI and how the big tech companies are involved in, as I mentioned, in the army and in the war efforts of the Israeli side. I mean, we know that Israel has been using different technologies, including Lavender, including Where is Daddy, and including the Gospel. All these technologies that are built on a very strong and powerful computing abilities that Israel and the Israeli army did not have before the war. And they are mainly relying on the support that is being given by Google, by Azure and Microsoft, and by Amazon. And those companies who are supposed to be selling software, who are supposed to be helping and communicating, etc., became companies that sell arms. They are part of the arms dealing. We are in a new reality where Google basically drop in their pages and their website that their AI won't be used in war. They are declaring that they are having, official contracts with many ministries of defense around the globe and being part of wars. And this is how we should look at them, and this is how we should hold them also accountable, and to understand that these companies, the masks are down and they are basically running and doing the things in a very clear way. I want also to address another point, which is around digital payments and how trying to suffocate the Palestinian economy, trying to suffocate also the humanitarian efforts in the time of crisis and the time of war, that you are not being able, to donate money to crowdfunding campaigns when the word Gaza is there, you are being deplatformed. Accounts at PayPal and other platforms have been also closed and restricted because they have been trying to pass donation to the people who are in a horrible situation, in a starvation situation. Yet those companies and those platforms are not only preventing Palestinian, and they have been doing this historically, from using them like PayPal, but also preventing people who are sitting in the US and Europe and other places and the rest of the world trying to do their solidarity, to do some kind of support, even in small amounts, and being deplatformed. I will stop here and back to you, Mana.
Thank you so much, Nadeem, and thank you, Ragdan, for answering this very first question. Like we've seen a lot of intersectionality between what's happening in Palestine and how big tech are exacerbating the situation on the ground and what's happening in Sudan, among other countries in our region. But also, when we are speaking about tech harms, we know that tech harms disproportionately affect oppressed communities, with an especially severe impact on marginalized and vulnerable groups within those oppressed communities, such as women, LGBTQI communities, and migrant groups. Given Meta's recent announcement on changing or weakening their hate speech policy, how do you anticipate these shifts will further impact these communities and groups in Sudan and then in Palestine? And what risks and challenges should we be most concerned about? I'll start with you, Ragdan, again.
Thank you, Muna. These are questions and these are concerns. I feel like I can talk about the entire day, but I'm going to try to summarize as much as I can. But thank you for asking the question, because it's definitely a concern. It's definitely a concern for us. Let's start with women. Sudanese women are already routinely harassed online, especially those who speak out against the war or advocate for human rights. During the revolution and throughout this current conflict, women journalists, activists, and even just everyday users have been targeted with sexualized threats, doxing, and smear campaigns. Weakening hate speech protection means these attacks will likely increase in both volume and brutality, I would believe. And the chilling effect is real, right? Women will withdraw from public discourse out of fear for their safety. Especially with the issue of women, I'm not sure how many people have been following the war in Sudan, but rape has been used as a tool of war for the last 2 years. And it has resulted in a lot of conversations that I'm seeing online that are really worrying. In a lot of these women groups, I see women asking questions especially when the RSF, the militia, enters like to a new area. I see a lot of women asking how halal it is to commit suicide, like in this context. And the answers are worrying, even worse, right? They're not getting the mental health support they need. Some other women would advise to go like, it's better than getting raped. It's better than ending up with a child from a militia. These conversations exist without the expert guidance, without the monitoring, without any fit. And honestly, I don't know what it results in, but the social media platform is providing a place for that and providing a place for fear, right? Because it's one thing for a woman to write that question, but these military have wins and losses have been, ongoing for 2 years. And I think once the idea is in your head, other women might even consider. So there are issues like that are really worrying. And I just don't know with like weakening these policies, what would happen, because there's already a lack of response for it. Then there's the LGBTI community for us. It's one of the most vulnerable, I think, across the region, but definitely in Sudan, it's definitely an invisible group of people. And even before the policy shift, right? So hate speech, even before the policy shift, hate speech targeting queer Sudanese people were widespread. Posts inciting violence, calling for the so-called moral cleansing, or outing individuals have long been shared within the social media platforms. Now, with Meta signaling scaling back the enforcement, I feel like it effectively gives hate actors a green light, like go wild, in a context where being LGBTI can already mean social exclusion or violence. So it's incredibly dangerous. Talking about minority groups, also there is the refugee status, right? A lot of us, including my family, are now in Cairo, for example. A lot of the citizens of Khartoum and other cities that were attacked ended up leaving. Some ended up in refugee camps in Ethiopia, in South Sudan, in Chad, and we don't even have oversight of what's happening there. But I'm going to use Egypt as an example because since the war, it was the easiest place to get to, so a lot of Sudanese got to that. We have seen not just an increased spike in hate, we have seen increased spike of hate that followed by physical violence, right? By the Egyptians, and a lot of it is based on the fear and based on the hate speech that we have seen online. We have seen fake posts blaming migrants for, I don't know, outbreaks, on theft, on increased crime, even increased rent, and the worsening economy situation. I have seen that, and I'm like, oh, it's extremely hard to make that correlation, but people did through it might started intentionally, but some of it was intentional. And it does result in direct harm, right? So it's not just about individual harm, it's about structural violence. And in Sudan, and I feel like now with the refugee status, online hate often translates directly into offline violence. And we have seen that happening. We have published a number of reports that directly shows like, these are the trends, these are the keywords, which are often either even before the decline or like the diminishing policy, were not picked up by social media platforms. I would say that Meta's platform for us, for example, need to improve their algorithms, their keywords. They need to localize their content. There are stuff that we're seeing on TikTok that just tells you that there is no policy that addresses Sudan to begin with. And I'm not even going to talk about X because it's a whole other thing. But yeah, so over to you, Nadeem, in Palestine.
Thank you, Rodan. So as I mentioned before, the hate speech in the Palestinian case, it's a whole issue, an issue about classifiers and automated work that the social media platforms have not been dealing with, right? And we know that in X, since Elon Musk bought it, I mean, there's hardly any content moderation that is happening, which basically allowing lots of hate speech, lots of disinformation and misinformation and happening there, specifically in Hebrew language. But the thing that the main problem is on Meta platforms, which where most of the Palestinians and the Israelis are there. And in this aspect, what is happening is basically, and if I look at it again, like in a retrospective, like historically what has been happening there, we having a situation that there is, I think if everybody like silence the microphones would be great. Going back historically on this issue, I think it's important to look how the perspective of the social media companies about people coming from the global south, because this is like essential, how the companies positioning people as who are, the threat, who are the ones who are making the violence, and who are not, who are part of the Western camp, and they are very legitimate and their content is legitimate, even if they are inciting, and who are very suspicious people that are creating the violence and are a threat and intimidation to the Western camp. Because according to that, and if we go back like to September 11th and then the startup of those companies and 2007 and 2008, this is the way that they looked at the Arabic and / the Muslim world, right? The MENA region is the area that is creating the terrorism and the incitement, and we have to focus on that. And then that's why the Arabic classifiers were very developed, overdeveloped for our arguments. And that's why 10 years after only they started doing something in Hebrew, despite that the digital rights community and specifically Hamli have been leading campaigns. And this is not something that is, theoretical. This is something that is very much about the violence that's happening on the ground. So if I go, for example, to the uprising that happened in May 21, settler extremist group were attacking Palestinian communities in the mixed city, in Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, and in other places, while they are doing and coordinating those attacks on the social media. And it's right. I mean, we were coming to the company and telling them there is this case and that case, and they were removing it, but they were not structurally dealing with it. And only after the PSR report and the audit and, the international media criticizing the Meta and all of this pressure, finally they declared a Hebrew classifier that is dealing with it in September 23. Right, like almost a decade after they, more than a decade that they started with dealing with Arabic and the Palestinian content. So for almost a decade, there was nothing there. Like you could say in Hebrew, anything that you like, from rape, kill, etc., all the horrible things that you can imagine. And this would be legitimate in Meta. And then moving forward, during the war, we understood from leaking documents and from different publications that basically even that classifier in Hebrew is ineffective. Hamli have been doing lots of tests, examining the platform, seeing, monitoring, and we have so many cases, for example, of ads, like ads supposed to have a higher level of scrutiny, that the platform should stop, the ad manager should stop those things, but they were not stopping the ads in Hebrew that were calling for rape, for killing. There were a settler group that was advertising a call for assassination of a pro-Palestinian American activist with his name, with his address, etc. There were ads towards Palestinian. They were calling the Palestinian, leave now your home because we're coming for you. So the online and the offline came in a mix together. There were attacks. The platforms were aware because we were sending them and meeting with the highest levels of those platforms, giving them our reports, giving them our examination. And until today, by the way, our violence indicator that we published a month ago speaks about 12 million violent and inciting conversation, 12 million in both Meta and X. And X is much worse, but still in Meta, there are millions of conversations, despite that they declare that there is a Hebrew classifier that's supposed to prevent them from even like showing on the platform. This is still not happening. And still for the company, there is one side that's to blame. There is one side that is problematic. And, we have to make sure that they are not exaggerating the situation and, inciting. And there is another side that is the side that we support to be part of it, to understand it, because they are part of our political camp, because they are in alignment with the American administration, etc., etc. And this is the reality that we're living and struggling with.
Thank you so much, Nadeem and Raghdan, for sharing those insights. And it's truly heartbreaking to see how the inaction of the tech platforms is substantially contributing to dehumanizing people, whether it be in Sudan or in Palestine or elsewhere in global majority countries where people are lagging behind when it comes to having fair legislations to protect them from tech harms. I'd like to remind our audience that if they are interested in asking any questions or commenting on any of the points that have been mentioned by our esteemed speakers, that they are more than welcome to leave their questions and comments in the chat box, and we will be passing those questions to our speakers by the end of the session. For years, civil society in the MENA region has been sounding the alarm about digital authoritarianism and unchecked power of tech platforms. Today, with increasing alignment between tech companies and political administrations such as X and Meta, growing ties with Trump administration, and figures like Elon Musk owning a major platform while being part of the policy-making process, the fight for accountability has become even more challenging. In the MENA region, where there are limited avenues to advocate for fair and just regulatory protections, and more broadly, where global majority communities are constantly silenced, in tech governance discussions, the stakes are even higher. And my question to you, Ragdan, and then to Nadim, in this context, how can civil society effectively push for meaningful accountability and policy changes, particularly when democratic safeguards are weak or absent? What strategies can help to ensure that tech regulations is equitable and truly protective of marginalized groups?
Oh, loving your questions, Mona. It is a lot on what I have been focusing on lately, honestly. What can we do to ensure big tech accountability with everything they are doing, for example, in Palestine, or not doing in Sudan? I think in regions like MENA, where democratic safeguards are weak or non-existent, and where tech companies align with authoritarian interests, the fight for accountability is not just difficult, it's dangerous. Yet it's precisely in these environments that civil society must remain bold, creative and collective. And I focus on the collective. Let's be honest, the traditional routes for tech accountability, policy consultations, legislative reform, platform advisory councils are largely closed off to civil society in Global South. We are not at the table. We are, even if we're tokens at the table, but we're not decision makers. First, in my opinion, okay, thank you, Mona. So first, we must build power collectively across borders. The MENA civil society cannot fight this alone. We need to strengthen transitional coalitions with groups in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia. Again, throughout the few hours that we have been talking today, I have heard a lot of issues that were raised that are extremely, extremely similar to what we're seeing in Sudan. And the harms we face are interconnected, right? So we need to share strategy. We need joint campaigns, which your team has been doing quite well on. And we need coordinated pressure that says you can't keep exposing harm to Global South while governing from the North. I have serious issue with this. Second, we must strategically target leverage points. Team naming and shaming. I feel like we have really, really tried to work with these platforms, again, by literally doing their work as Beam reports. We have done their work. I'm like, here, nothing. When they respond is when we publish a piece, because we are also a media company, saying like, we have found these networks that have been operating on these platforms that goes against your community standards. We have flagged this issue to Meta, for example. Zero response. These issues are still on the platform. That's when we realize they come to us and they go like, oh, we loved your report. You have actually filed. Can you send us links? Can you send us that? It takes them a while. They eventually take it off. So naming and shaming, I'm big on that, as I said. And I do think we need to do more of that collectively. And finally, I want to say we need to invest in alternative infrastructures. We can't just ask for better moderation. We need to build an ecosystem that serves us. That means supporting regional tech tools, investing in local digital rights groups, creating independent fact-checking and emergency response networks, because even the ones that exist are funded by the North. So a lot of the direction, a lot of support is also directed by them. We do need more of alternative infrastructures, I would say. And finally, we need to reframe the conversation. We're not just asking them to protect users. It's about dismantling digital colonization. They do exist in our spaces. They do exist in our countries. They do use our data. They do use our markets. They do make money out of it, right? So it's not just about protecting the users online, but it's about getting what's ours if you are continuing to operate in this space. And for me, it's just equalizing the power, which it's a long-term progress. And it requires all hands on deck. It requires naming and shaming. It requires learning from each other. But without that collective action, I honestly don't see us being able to push back. Opportunity.
Yes, I do agree with you about the naming and shaming. I think this is really important through the media and trying to find the places and the opportunities where we are pushing them. I think generally we need like to also to switch to a different channel, because I think business is not as usual. We have to be in a much different place, a place where we are basically not, doing the usual advocacy of having engagement with the companies and meetings, and then them managing our anger, and then them managing us in a different ways, and having, all of these professional people that they hire in order, to gaslight you in the meetings, and then you go out without understanding what exactly happened. We really need to do a switch, and we need to have much more aggressive approach, in my opinion, towards those companies, because the usual advocacy is not clearly not working anymore, specifically in the political climate and the era that we are living. So one of the things that we have been thinking and coordinating with others is basically also coming together as coalitions, as specifically groups from the global majority. Second, we need to be present also in the places that there are decision making that is happening, specifically to be also in the US and to have our own teams and our own advocacy officers and our own plans. I know that this is not simple for all of the organizations, and this is cost money and lots of effort, but this is something that maybe could be done together. One of the models that we have been trying to do together, a group of us, a group of digital rights organizations from the Global South, is basically to have a joint house in Brussels where we can share the cost and we can do a joint strategy towards the decision makers. And I'm emphasizing Europe also because of the DSA and because of other opportunities to hold those companies accountable. But beyond that, also, I think it's really important to collect evidence and to seek for legal and for litigation, not just regulation, but also for litigation, and to take these companies into courts. I think this is something that they are also afraid of. And if we join together and take different countries and different cases and prove them, even if we will not win the case, but just, the fuss around it, the noise is something that is helping us to put them. And I think there are cases that came from Myanmar that are still in courts and in other places which are very important. I want also just to mention the issue of the workers and the tech worker organizing. This is really something important. There are more and more people in this sector who want to speak out, who want to have a different voice, and there are allies inside the companies who think differently from the leadership, and we should seek partnership with those workers and try to impact as much as possible. And there is also the whole issue of shareholders and the general assemblies of the companies. I know that for most of the shareholders, this is, they want to be cooperating, but there are ethical investment houses who would cooperate and are cooperating with some of the organizations to present cases and resolutions in the general assemblies. Even if we don't win those cases, but just to put the pressure and to put our agendas inside those places, the places that are sensitive for the leadership of the companies, these are achievements, in my opinion. And we are putting our causes as agenda on those. And lastly, I think we should think seriously about the boycott strategy, especially in the Global South, because as Ragdan mentioned, we are markets for them. They are making lots of money from there. We are not using enough the leverage that we have. And I know that in the Palestinian case, for example, Starbucks and other companies during the war suffered from lots of damages, economical damages. I know that's difficult for us to boycott Google and Meta products, but still there are things and avenues to check how we can make a serious financial damage for them and to make them rethink, or at least to put our causes and our agenda on their agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadeem and Ragdan, and sorry for nagging regarding the time, but we are running out of time. I really appreciate you joining us, although you are fasting, and I would also wish you happy Eid and كل سنة وأنتم سالمين. Without further ado, allow me please to ask Leah Kimathi, who's part of our leading steering group, and she's also part of the Council for Responsible Social Media in Kenya, to share with us her concluding remarks of this conference. Leah, I'm sorry for being late for you, but the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mona. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to make some closing remarks to these very great conversations. I've really enjoyed listening in and very rich. Now, and I think I want to start by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our listeners and to those that joined these conversations from all corners around the world. And I say that to my esteemed colleagues and fellow human rights defenders, especially in this digital sphere. And those of us in this forum, we fall in this category. I think even as we come to the end of these crucial conversations, the crucial gathering, we are not leaving this space with a sense of finality, defeat, or disillusionment, and especially given what's going on within this digital space. But I think listening to conversations, there's a sense of renewed sense of purpose and the ability for us to author our futures in spite of what is happening. And especially this is evidence from the great suggestions that have come through and the great presentations for the last 3 hours. But I think we are also not under any illusion that the challenges before us as a community are immense. And this has, of course, been eloquently elaborated by these presentations, that we face immense challenges, the stakes are high, but there is an unequivocal recognition that the potential for transformative change is well within our grasp. And I think for me, that gives me a lot of hope. I mean, of course, we are coming from the 2024 elections mega cycle, which laid bare the vulnerabilities inherent in relying on the goodwill of big tech. And we have been saying about that today. We witnessed the stark reality of self-regulations, limitations, and failures, and the fragility of democratic processes in the face of this unchecked power, unchecked corporate power. But also, there were a few lessons that were picked from these failures. I think now one of the things is that there is now more shared knowledge among peoples of the world about what is happening, about the real threats of tech being used to hurt society, being used to harm us, even as they keep harming, telling us that it is for our good. I think also beyond that, we now recognize that this kind of harms go beyond elections to every other spheres of our lives. We are talking about education, we are talking about health, we are talking about the environment, peace and security, and the general well-being. But also out of these conversations is a realization, and out of these experiences too, I think we have also come to the realization of our own empowerment. And this empowerment is coming through voices and also through powerful coalitions like our coalition right here, a coalition that is made up of people coming from different corners of the world, different walks of life, to confront the challenges of technology that face us as humanity. I would say that at the Global Coalition for Tech Justice, we are challenging ourselves to be architects of a future where technology serves humanity, not the other way around, as is happening in some spaces right now. We are pushing for the building of a democratic and human rights-based ecosystem, one with binding accountability mechanisms, transparency requirements, and enforceable standards that transcend borders, national borders, nation states, and national politics. And especially for those of us in the global majority, this has to be accompanied by decolonization, as one of the last speakers has talked about. So decolonization of the whole technology ecosystem. And therefore, this now calls for more urgent, actions, especially given the systemic rollback of guardrails and safeguards that we are witnessing with big tech, obviously enabled by the rise of autocratic and far-right actors in power across the world, even in nations that historically were regarded as the bastions of democracy. And somebody has just referenced the unholy alliance, as it were, between Trump and Elon Musk, but also the soft landing for the other tech boys, that's called the tech boys, as it were. And to be clear, and I think this again has been reiterated over and over again, this is not a task for any one nation or a single organization. This is an enormous task that demands a united front, a global movement that resonates from the halls of power to the grassroots community so that everybody must be brought on board to challenge technology, and especially the harmful aspects of technology. So in a sense, it is a unity of purpose among like-minded institutions that we are calling for, that we are demanding, that we are creating, and that we are seeding. And therefore, in this regard, we call upon democratic policymakers and regulators the world over to enact rights-respecting rules and regulations. We urge the European Commission, for example, as one of those, those spaces where we have gold standards in terms of regulation of tech, to continue its leadership in the regulation of big tech, to enforce its digital rule book with unwavering resolve, and to stand in solidarity, especially with nations of the global majority that are striving for rights respecting legislation and that perhaps may not be there yet or may not have the wherewithal for various reasons to achieve that fast enough. Further, we call upon the United Nations, the OECD, and all similar international bodies to secure binding business and human rights obligations, particularly in regions where democracy is fragile and conflicts loom. And we've just had the case of Palestine, the case of Sudan, and several other pockets in Africa that almost are going unnoticed. Now, I think that the other critical constituency and allies within this space as we demand or as we strive for more responsive technology is advertisers and investors. And we say to them, their power is immense. Use it to demand for accountability, to invest in independent media, and to build a digital infrastructure that upholds our shared values as humanity. And to us, fellow civil society organizations, activists, and ordinary users of the digital platforms, our voices are the lifeblood of this movement, no doubt. So we must then, as of necessity, continue to mobilize, as we are doing, to campaign, to raise our voices, and to engage in strategic thought and action, and to demand technology that is grounded in shared values and integrity for humanity. And as I conclude, I think I want to reiterate that we are now at a consensus in many respects, that we must not allow technology to be just about algorithms, data, and the bottom line, as companies would want it to be. For us, we must demand that technology must be humanized. It must embody the dignity of every human individual, preserve our democracies, and safeguard our futures. Technology must serve as an enabler, not an impediment to a progressive and sustainable future. That is not debatable. Therefore, and with renewed hope, resolve, and unwavering commitment that has been reflected throughout the conversations we've had today, we must continue on this vanguard mission that we have set for ourselves. I thank you. Back to you, Alex, or is it Mona?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leah, for concluding our conference in this way. It's our first Global Tech Justice Conference in this year, 2025. We've spent, over 2 years together creating this movement globally across regions in order to be able to unite. And I think, as we've seen at this conference, voices, from around the world coming together, learning from each other, and figuring out how we're going to collectively face this huge injustice and challenge down, in the age of tech oligarchy, as we've discussed. But I think we're doing it now from a truly global understanding of harm, not one that's defined from the global north and by global north experts and actors, but really from the places where harms are being done every single day of the worst and most iniquitous kind. And I just want to thank everybody who's joined us from all four corners of the world, and to our partners within the Global Coalition for Tech Justice, to our steering group leaders, and to all of those who are allying with the movement in order to take action together. Now, as Digital Action, as conveners, we're very honored to be able to serve this movement, and we're also going to be passing on our leadership to two exceptional leaders from the Global South, Dalia Othman and Lucy Dumanian, who are joining us in April, and we're very, very much looking forward to seeing the leadership from them and the whole movement taking us to new heights of possibility and transformation, I think. Because now we truly understand what the scale is of what needs to be done and of the alternatives that we can create together for a brighter future. So thank you so much for everybody, to everybody for joining, and to my colleagues on the Digital Action team for creating this incredible experience for us all together. So thank you, and take care.